Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the entire story of Jake, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Tonight we follow the story of Jake the dog. To many who wander into the land of Ooh, Jake looks like a carefree companion, a stretchy yellow dog who plays his viola, naps in the grass, and laughs at danger. But behind his easy smile and playful eyes lies a story rooted in mystery, a story that begins long before Jake's adventures with Finn, back when the world was still trying to understand what it had become after the Great Mushroom War. Jake's life begins in a way unlike anyone else's, and the echoes of that strange birth ripple quietly through the rest of his story. Jake was raised by Joshua and Margaret, two of Oo's most well-known dog adventurers. They were bold, brave, and often reckless, charging into danger with a grin. Their home was filled with maps, weapons, and the kind of lively chaos that comes from a family always ready for the next quest. They had already raised Jermaine, Jake's older brother, in this world of daring deeds. But Jake's arrival was unlike Jermaine's, because Jake wasn't born in the usual way. His life started with an accident, or perhaps something more. Joshua, during one of his battles, was bitten by a strange, shape-shifting creature. Its bite didn't just leave a wound. It carried with it a magic unlike anything Joshua had ever encountered. And from that strange moment, something new began to grow inside him. Not an infection, not a curse, but life. And from that life came Jake. It's a surreal, dreamlike beginning, almost as if Jake wasn't simply born, but chosen, planted into the world like a seed. This origin sets him apart. Unlike Jermaine, who was born from Margaret, Jake arrived from a magical accident that blended Joshua's essence with something otherworldly. When he was finally brought into the family, he wasn't treated as a strange occurrence. He was simply Jake, their child, their dog, their boy. This quiet act of acceptance shaped Jake's life more than he ever knew. From the moment he could crawl, he was surrounded not by whispers of being different, but by warmth, laughter, and unconditional love. For Joshua and Margaret, Jake's arrival was simply another adventure. For Jermaine, it meant gaining a brother who would fill the house with chaos and charm. Even as a pup, Jake displayed the powers that would one day define him. His body could stretch, grow, shrink, twist, and bend in ways no normal dog ever could. To a child, it was just play. He could turn himself into a chair to surprise Jermaine, puff himself into a balloon to float around, or stretch his arms long enough to grab a cookie jar from the highest shelf. Where most would find these powers unsettling, his family embraced them. To Joshua, they were proof that his boy had inherited the spirit of adventure. To Margaret, they were simply part of who Jake was meant to be. And so Jake grew in a home where magic wasn't feared but laughed with, where strange powers weren't hidden but celebrated. His childhood was a blur of sunny afternoons, friendly wrestling matches with Jermaine, and cozy evenings in the warm glow of home. Yet even in these moments, the mystery of Jake's origins lingered like a soft shadow. The creature that had bitten Joshua was never truly explained. Was it a random monster of the wastelands, or something greater, an entity from the deeper forces of Ooh? Some fans believe Jake's stretching powers may connect him to the cosmic order of shape and possibility. The way his body bends and reforms suggests a link to the very malleability of existence itself, as though he carries a fragment of the nightosphere's chaos, or perhaps the creativity of the universe's design. In Ooh, magic often comes from bloodlines and bargains, And Jake, whether he knew it or not, was born carrying a strange inheritance. But Jake never worried about that. For him, life was about family, play, and the simple joys of being alive. While the shadows of his origin stretched far and deep, Jake only stretched his arms further to hug his loved ones closer. He was not burdened by his birth. Instead, he floated through childhood with a laugh in his chest and a snack in his paw. As he grew, the family expanded. One day, Joshua and Margaret took in another child. This time, not a dog, but a human. A boy with wide eyes and a boundless spirit. His name was Finn. And though Jermaine had been Jake's brother from the beginning, Finn became his partner, his other half, the piece of his story that would transform Jake from an unusual pup into one of Ooh's greatest adventures. But before Finn, there was Jermaine and the quiet foundation of Jake's earliest years. Jermaine was steady where Jake was playful. He was patient, hardworking, and rooted. In contrast, Jake was curious, restless, and magical in ways Jermaine could never be. This balance shaped Jake's sense of self. Jermaine's grounded nature taught him loyalty, while his own stretching powers gave him freedom. Even at a young age, Jake seemed to understand that life was not meant to be taken too seriously. Perhaps it was because he knew, deep down, that he was a child of strangeness. Or perhaps it was simply his nature, to laugh, to play, and to roll with whatever the world threw his way. Where others might question why they existed, Jake simply wagged his tail and said, "Why not?" The post-apocalyptic world of Ooh was filled with ruins of the old world, reminders of a time when humanity had nearly destroyed itself. And yet, here in this world of wreckage, Jake thrived. He was not a remnant of the past, but a promise of something new. His powers were a reflection of a world where rules had shifted, where magic now flowed through cracks in the old order. Jake, without knowing it, was the embodiment of this new age, a bridge between the ordinary and the impossible. And so the mystery of Jake's birth remained unsolved, but perhaps it was never meant to be solved. Because Jake himself didn't live like a mystery. He lived like an answer to fear, to loneliness, to the question of what it means to be different. He lived as proof that love can turn even the strangest beginnings into the warmest stories. It is here, in the quiet of his childhood, that Jake's journey truly begins. Jake's early years unfolded with the ease of a summer afternoon, golden and unhurried. His powers, though extraordinary, slipped into the rhythm of family life as naturally as breathing. Margaret would smile as Jake stretched an arm across the room to fetch her teacup, or when he curled himself into a basket that seemed far too small for his body. To her, he wasn't a miracle to be studied, but a son to be cherished, Joshua, in his own way, treated Jake's abilities like tools for adventure. He would train the pup in small, playful ways, teaching him how to use his stretchy arms to grab hold of a ledge, or how to inflate himself into a shield when play-fighting in the yard. Joshua may not have been the gentlest of fathers, but his pride in Jake was clear. He saw his boy's strange talents, not as accidents, but as strengths, waiting to be sharpened. And then there was Jermaine, older, steadier, the brother who kept the household in balance. Jermaine often ended up cleaning the messes Jake left behind, patching up walls stretched too thin, or mopping up spilled jars knocked down in a playful leap. But even when frustrated, Jermaine's heart was steady. He loved Jake as only a brother could, with exasperation laced with devotion. Their bond was complicated but firm. Jermaine became the grounding stone that kept Jake from drifting too far into his own chaos. In these early days, Jake never seemed to question his identity. He didn't look into the mirror and wonder why his arms could grow to the size of tree trunks, or why his skin stretched like clay. For Jake, it was just another way to play. His philosophy formed in those moments. that life didn't need to be dissected or overthought. It was meant to be lived with laughter and love. Still, the world around them whispered of stranger things. The land of Oo, stitched together from the ruins of the old world, was a place of magic and danger. Creatures roamed with no clear origin. Cursed objects and forgotten spells were tucked into corners of the landscape. And though Joshua and Margaret's home felt warm and safe, it was also a doorway into countless unknowns. Jake's powers, so unusual even in Oo, seemed to place him halfway between the ordinary and the cosmic. Some say his birth tied him to the restless forces beneath the surface of the world. Others imagined that his existence was a sign of what Oo had become after the Great Mushroom War, a land where strange hybrids and magical beings were not mistakes, but the new children of creation. Jake, then, was less an accident and more a reflection of the world's rebirth. He was Oo's laughter and elasticity made flesh. And yet, beneath the mystery, Jake's spirit remained grounded. He learned early on that love didn't come from origins, but from connections. Germaine taught him that responsibility was an act of care. Margaret showed him that patience and gentleness mattered as much as bravery. Joshua, though often blunt, gave him courage and the thrill of daring. From each of them, Jake wove together the traits that would later define him: playful yet protective, carefree yet loyal, mischievous yet wise in ways he didn't always realize. As he grew, Jake began to stretch his curiosity outward. He'd wander the edges of the yard, sniffing at the ruins of old machines or peering at weeds that sparkled faintly with leftover magic. Sometimes he'd climb the highest trees, stretching himself like a ribbon between branches, and watch the horizon glow with colors from both sun and fallout. To Jake, this was normal. The world had always been strange, and he saw no reason to question it. The ruins were just part of the playground. The mysteries of his own body were simply another game. But in quiet moments when the stars were bright and Germaine had already fallen asleep, Jake sometimes wondered about the bite that had brought him here. He'd ask Joshua what the creature looked like, what it wanted. Joshua would shrug, brush it off, and say it was just another monster. Nothing worth remembering. Yet Jake would linger on the thought. If that monster hadn't bitten Joshua, would he even exist? And if his life began in such a strange way, what did that mean for who he was meant to be? The questions floated in and out of Jake's mind like passing clouds. He never let them weigh too heavily on him. But perhaps they planted seeds of awareness that his story was never just an ordinary one. Even so, his childhood was filled with joy. He played, he laughed, he stretched himself into new shapes, and he filled the house with noise and energy. Life for Jake was not a puzzle to solve, but a melody to hum along with. And though he couldn't yet see the vast arc of his future, the foundation was being laid. A future where his role would shift from mischievous child to loyal brother, from carefree pup to cosmic guide. And just as the family had embraced him without hesitation, Jake would grow to embrace the world around him with the same unconditional love. His origins might have been steeped in mystery, but his heart was simple, steady, and endlessly open. It was in this strange harmony between the unknown and the familiar that Jake's story quietly unfolded. As Jake stepped further into his boyhood, the house that Joshua and Margaret built became both a sanctuary and a classroom. Every corner echoed with adventure stories, from Joshua's loud retellings of epic battles to Margaret's quieter lessons in kindness and care. Jake absorbed all of it, and while Germaine leaned more toward Margaret's steady nature, Jake drifted somewhere in between, shaped by Joshua's daring and Margaret's warmth, yet marked by the undeniable strangeness of his powers, Jake's abilities blossomed as he aged. What had once been small stretches and silly tricks began to grow into feats that no ordinary creature could dream of. He could expand into colossal shapes that loomed over the yard, flatten himself thin enough to slide under locked doors, or twist into forms that blurred the line between animal and imagination. While many children in Ooh might stumble upon strange toys or bits of magic from the old world, Jake's very body was the magic. Margaret would sometimes pause and watch him, her eyes filled with equal parts wonder and quiet worry. She knew her son was special in a way she couldn't fully protect. In Ooh, uniqueness often invited danger. But rather than cloaking Jake in fear, she chose to remind him of gentleness, that power should never come before love, and that his abilities didn't make him greater than anyone else. They simply made him Jake. Joshua, on the other hand, took every chance to test Jake's stretching. He would call his son into mock training sessions, encouraging him to form a shield against thrown pebbles or to sling his arms out like lassos. Jake didn't always take the lesson seriously. He laughed when Joshua grew frustrated, and sometimes slipped away mid-training to nap under a tree. Yet these sessions planted deeper skills, even if Jake didn't realize it. In time, those playful tests would become instincts that saved his life, and Finn's, countless times. And then came the moment that changed Jake's path forever. A bundle left on the doorstep, swaddled in cloth, tiny fists clenched against the night air. A human baby. Finn. Joshua and Margaret didn't hesitate. They welcomed him inside just as they had once welcomed Jake with all his strangeness. For Jake, Finn's arrival was like a new sunrise. He had always been a brother to Jermaine, but Jermaine's patience made him feel more like a guardian than a partner. With Finn, though, Jake found someone to match his boundless curiosity. Even when Finn could barely crawl, Jake stretched his arms out to hold him, bouncing him gently, making silly faces with stretched eyes and ears until Finn laughed. Their bond was immediate, unshakable, and as natural as breathing. Jermaine noticed the shift. His quiet place in the family grew even quieter as Jake and Finn's laughter filled the halls. Where Jermaine took responsibility for chores, Jake pulled Finn into play. Where Jermaine followed routines, Jake and Finn spun stories and built adventures out of nothing. This didn't erase Jermaine's love. It simply set the stage for the roles each brother would play. Jermaine would become the grounding stone, the one who stayed. Jake and Finn would become the wanderers, the heroes, the dreamers. Together, Jake and Finn made sense of a world that often didn't. The ruins of the old human age weren't frightening. They were playgrounds. Monsters weren't only threats. They were chances for Jake to show off his powers and for Finn to learn bravery. Their bond made them fearless because, even in the strangest corners of Ooh, they knew they had each other. Jake's stretchy powers often became the glue of their games. He could transform into a fort, a boat, or a shield. He could become the wings that carried Finn into the air, or the bridge that stretched them across broken ground. For Finn, Jake wasn't just a brother. He was magic itself. Playmate, protector, and partner all in one. And for Jake, Finn was the spark that gave his life more meaning than endless naps or casual fun. Finn made him want to see the world, to try to be more than the laid-back pup he might have otherwise remained. Still, in those early years, Jake's carefree philosophy was the same. Take life easy and enjoy the moment. Don't let the heavy questions sink too deep. His powers may have been born of mystery, but Jake rarely sought answers. Instead, he leaned into laughter and love. His existence, unusual as it was, taught him early that family isn't about how you arrive in the world. It's about who takes you in, who stands beside you, and who loves you regardless of the shadows in your past. Yet the shadows never completely faded. The memory of Joshua's strange bite lingered like an unanswered riddle. Sometimes Jake's body would ripple in ways that felt almost alien, as though his powers carried whispers from beyond. He'd laugh it off, stretching into a silly balloon or flattening into a pancake shape. But deep down, something about his abilities felt older than himself, like a song he didn't know the words to, only the melody. The world outside their home seemed to sense it too. Magical beings sometimes reacted strangely to Jake. Some monsters hesitated before attacking, their eyes narrowing as though they recognized something in his form. Other creatures of magic treated him with a peculiar kind of respect, bowing their heads slightly or backing away when he expanded into his full strength. Jake rarely noticed, but Margaret did. She'd watched these interactions in silence, her thoughts hidden behind calm eyes. She never wanted Jake to feel like an outsider. To her, he was simply her son. But she couldn't help but wonder, was Jake meant for something greater? Was his birth part of a story far larger than their family? For now, though, Jake's life remained warm and full. He and Finn grew together, each shaping the other. Jermaine, too, played his quiet part, reminding them both that not all adventures required leaving home. And through it all, Jake's laughter never dimmed. His origins might have been written in strangeness, but his days were painted in joy. This is how Jake's childhood flowed, like a river, meandering through moments of mystery and moments of mirth. And though he did not yet know it, the ripples from his unusual beginning were already stretching outward, reaching toward the destiny that awaited him. As Jake entered his later childhood, the foundations of who he would become were already set. He was loyal, playful, and endlessly curious, yet at the same time grounded in a philosophy that seemed almost ancient, that life was meant to be lived without fear. It was a lesson he hadn't been taught directly, but one that came from the very way he was brought into the world. Born of strangeness, yet welcomed without hesitation, Jake understood instinctively that existence didn't need to be justified, it only needed to be embraced. He often wandered fields near their home, stretching himself into shapes that startled the birds or amused the insects. Sometimes he'd grow as tall as a house, just to watch the horizon differently. Other times he'd shrink into something no larger than a mouse, crawling through cracks in the earth to discover hidden tunnels and glowing mushrooms. To Jake, these weren't feats of power, they were simply ways of exploring. His body was a tool for joy, and his heart was too light to weigh it down with questions. Yet every so often, he'd stumble into reminders of how fragile life in Ooh could be. Remnants of the old world were scattered everywhere. Rusted vehicles overgrown with vines, collapsed buildings where silence hung heavy, broken machines still humming faintly with forgotten energy. Jake never lingered long in these ruins. They didn't scare him exactly, but they whispered of a past he didn't understand. Finn, still small at this time, would tug at Jake's arm with wide eyes, asking what those places were. Jake never gave him the full truth because he didn't know it himself. Instead, he'd make up stories, tales of sleeping giants or secret kingdoms, to keep the fear away. Even then, Jake had begun playing the role he would carry all his life, the one who turned darkness into laughter, who softened sharp edges with a smile. Life at home shifted slowly as Finn grew older. The baby who once clung to Jake's stretchy arms was now running alongside him, wooden sword in hand. Together, they began to imagine themselves as heroes. Their backyard became a kingdom, their toys became enchanted relics, and their skirmishes with shadows and wind became the early sketches of the adventures that awaited them. Jermaine watched with quiet disapproval at times, worried about the recklessness of their games, but deep down he understood. These two were meant for something different. And through it all, Jake's powers grew with him. His control sharpened, his instincts deepened. He learned to form weapons from his limbs, shields from his skin, and wings from his back. He discovered he could split his body into shapes so strange they almost defied logic, though he rarely used them for anything serious. To Jake, they were just new tricks to show Finn, new ways to make him laugh. But beneath the laughter was something profound. Jake's abilities were teaching him that the body and the self were not fixed. They were fluid, malleable, capable of becoming anything. This lesson, though Jake might not have put it into words, was at the heart of his philosophy, that life itself could be stretched, reshaped, and enjoyed. Still, whispers of destiny occasionally drifted in. Sometimes when Jake dreamed, he would see visions that felt larger than himself, vast skies where his body stretched into infinity, or strange lights that pulsed with the same energy he felt in his bones. He never told anyone about these dreams. He didn't think much of them, brushing them off as just weird sleep stuff. But looking back, they seemed like quiet messages, hints that Jake's place in the universe was not as small as he believed. Margaret noticed his restlessness at times, the way he gazed into the horizon, as though something was calling him. She would put a gentle paw on his head and remind him of the simple things, family dinners, chores, small joys. For Jake, this was enough. He didn't need to chase answers yet. He was happy where he was, with Finn by his side, Jermaine keeping watch, and his parents filling their home with warmth. And so Jake's earliest years came to an end, not with a grand revelation, but with a sense of readiness. He didn't yet know that he would one day face cosmic entities, wrestle with mortality, and leave behind a legacy larger than the land of Ooh itself. For now, he was simply Jake, a dog of mystery, born of accident, or perhaps of destiny, who chose not to question why he existed, but to live fully, joyfully, and freely. This is the foundation of Jake's story. A boy with powers that bent the laws of nature, yet a heart that never strayed from love. A child whose beginnings could have made him a figure of fear, but who instead became a source of laughter and light. His life began in shadow, but grew in sunshine. And soon this sunshine would stretch far beyond the walls of his childhood home. For Jake's story was only beginning. The brotherhood with Finn would transform him from playful pup into adventurer, from mysterious child into one of the central figures of Ooh's greatest tales. Jake's birth may have been a riddle, but his childhood gave us the answer, that love, family, and laughter could turn even the strangest of beginnings into something beautiful. His mystery remained, a quiet hum beneath the surface, but it never defined him. Instead, it pushed him toward the horizon, where every new day promised another adventure, another chance to stretch himself across the fabric of life. And with Finn at his side, that adventure was about to truly begin. Jake's childhood had been painted with the warm colors of family, of gentle guidance from Margaret, bold encouragement from Joshua, and the steady patience of Jermaine. Yet the brightest thread woven into his days was Finn. From the moment that small bundle had been left on their doorstep, Jake's life had shifted. What began as a bond of playfulness grew into something far deeper, something that would define both of them for the rest of their lives. Jake was not just a brother to Finn. He became his companion, his partner, and in many ways, his teacher. The two grew up in the same house, but quickly began creating a world of their own. Finn's human curiosity pushed outward, always seeking adventure, while Jake's easygoing nature pulled inward, reminding Finn that even a hero needed to laugh and rest. Their differences might have caused tension for other siblings, but for these two, it created a perfect balance. Finn carried the fire of determination, and Jake carried the calm of contentment. Together, they became a flame that was strong but never burned too fast. As children, their adventures were simple games. Imaginary quests in the backyard, monsters made from shadows, and treasure hunts mapped out with crayons on scraps of paper. But anew, imagination and reality often blurred. A pretend monster in the forest could turn out to be a very real one. A made-up treasure could lead them to relics of the old world, buzzing with strange energy. Where other children might have been frightened, Finn and Jake leaned into it, their bond making them brave. Jake's stretchy powers turned him into Finn's shield and transport, while Finn's courage gave Jake a reason to push beyond his natural laziness. Jake never viewed himself as a hero in the same way Finn did. He didn't hunger for adventure or glory. To him, it was all about the journey. If they fought a monster, Jake was just as happy making a silly face mid-battle as he was delivering the finishing blow. If they uncovered a mysterious ruin, he was as interested in lounging on a piece of fallen stone as he was in solving the puzzle inside. But Finn needed Jake's presence, because Jake reminded him that heroism wasn't only about fighting. It was also about joy, about sharing the road with someone who loved you unconditionally. As Finn grew older, his desire to help the innocent and fight evil grew sharper, more serious. Jake, though supportive, sometimes needed convincing. There were days he would rather stay in bed, stretching into a hammock and drifting off under the sun. Yet when Finn looked at him with those determined eyes, Jake never refused for long. He might grumble, he might joke, but in the end, he always stood by Finn's side. That loyalty became the core of their partnership. Jake wasn't a hero because he wanted glory. He was a hero because Finn needed him. There's something profoundly gentle about the way Jake guided Finn. He never lectured, never pressured. Instead, he offered small lessons tucked inside jokes or quiet comments. When Finn rushed into danger, Jake would remind him to think, to breathe, to slow down. When Finn stumbled emotionally, Jake's words might sound simple, but they carried deep truths. His laid-back nature hid a wisdom that came from experience, and though he often appeared carefree, he was shaping Finn's understanding of the world. Their bond was more than just sibling affection. It was spiritual, almost cosmic, as if Jake had been born to the world not only to live his own life, but to guide Finn through his. In this way, Jake was both brother and companion, both equal and mentor. Their partnership became the heartbeat of Adventure Time itself, the rhythm upon which all their stories danced. The land of Oo, with its strange kingdoms and unpredictable dangers, seemed to open itself to them. Together they battled foes like Ice King, who at first appeared as a nuisance, but later revealed layers of tragedy. Together, they wandered into dungeons filled with traps and treasures. And together, they built friendships that spanned candy people, fire beings, vampires, and even cosmic entities. Finn might have been the sword, but Jake was the hand that guided it, steady and sure. Even when Finn's dreams of heroism grew heavier, Jake kept things light. He would crack a joke mid-battle, or stretch into a ridiculous shape to break the tension. To some, it might have looked like laziness. But to Finn, and to us watching, it was something else. A reminder that joy was as important as victory. That a hero's path without laughter would become too heavy to walk. In their treehouse, once a simple place, later a home filled with memories, their companionship flourished. Jake often cooked breakfast while Finn sharpened his sword. They'd sit together in the evenings, one strumming an instrument, the other humming along. Their days blended battle and rest, seriousness and silliness, until the two became indistinguishable. This was their rhythm, their song, and it carried them through every challenge Ooh could throw at them. Jake never sought to overshadow Finn. In fact, he often stepped back, letting Finn shine, letting the boy grow into the hero he was meant to be. Jake didn't need the spotlight. His role was subtler, but no less vital. To be the companion who never faltered, the brother who reminded Finn of who he was when the world grew overwhelming. And so the legend of the two brothers began to spread, not as conquerors or rulers, but as adventurers, partners, and friends. For every tale of Finn's bravery, there was Jake, standing beside him, stretching into the impossible, smiling into the face of danger, and proving that companionship can be the greatest power of all. As Finn and Jake grew into their roles as adventurers, their partnership deepened in ways that only constant trials could forge. Every encounter tested the balance between Finn's relentless drive and Jake's calm detachment. Where Finn saw duty and destiny, Jake saw opportunity to live in the moment. Yet instead of clashing, these differences harmonized. Finn kept them moving forward, while Jake kept their feet steady on the ground. Many of their earliest quests became lessons in this balance. When Finn rushed headlong into danger, Jake would stretch out an arm to hold him back, reminding him that sometimes the smartest move was to wait, to watch, and to plan. And when Jake leaned too far into relaxation, Finn would tug at him with urgency, reminding him that lives were at stake. They were like two halves of a single rhythm, one beating fast and hard, the other steady and slow, together creating a pulse that carried them through the wild chaos of Ooh. Jake's powers gave their adventures a kind of playful fluidity. He could transform into a boat to carry Finn across rivers, a parachute to soften their falls, or a giant hand to sweep away enemies. In the middle of serious battles, he often slipped into shapes that seemed almost comical, turning into a horse or a sofa or something entirely impractical, just to get a laugh out of Finn. Yet beneath the humor, there was always intention. Jake understood that fear could cloud Finn's focus, and laughter could clear it away. His powers weren't just tools for fighting. They were instruments for keeping hope alive. In moments of quiet, Jake's companionship shone brightest. When Finn struggled with questions of morality and when the burden of being a hero weighed heavily, Jake was there with simple words that carried surprising depth. His advice was rarely long or complex. Instead, it was shaped like his life philosophy, clear, grounded, and softened by love. He would tell Finn not to overthink, to trust his heart, to keep going even when things didn't make sense. These lessons weren't shouted in the heat of battle. They were whispered over breakfast or shared under the stars while Jake strummed his viola. It's easy to overlook how much of Finn's growth came from Jake's steady presence. Finn learned bravery from his own instincts, yes, but he learned balance from Jake. He learned that a hero's heart must also hold gentleness, that it is not enough to fight. You must also love, laugh, and forgive. Without Jake, Finn might have burned too brightly, consumed by his need to prove himself. With Jake, that fire was tempered, shaped into something enduring. Their companionship was not without tension. Jake's easygoing nature sometimes frustrated Finn. There were times when Finn felt Jake wasn't taking their quest seriously enough, when his jokes seemed misplaced or his naps too frequent. But even in those moments, Finn couldn't deny that Jake was his anchor, and Jake, in turn, knew when to step forward, when to let his playful mask fall away and reveal the steady strength beneath. This dynamic played out in countless adventures across the kingdoms of Ooh. When the Candy Kingdom needed saving, Finn charged forward, while Jake provided the support that made victory possible. When Ice King's antics became dangerous, Finn's determination might have turned reckless, but Jake's calm stretched over the chaos, keeping them both safe. Again and again, their partnership proved that neither could truly succeed without the other. In a world filled with strange magic, cosmic beings, and dangers that stretched beyond comprehension, Finn and Jake's relationship remained something profoundly simple: brotherhood. Not bound by blood in the traditional sense, but bound by love, loyalty, and the shared experience of growing up together in a broken, beautiful world. The people of Uu came to know them as a pair, never separate, so where one was, the other followed. They were spoken of in the same breath: Finn and Jake, the adventurers, the heroes, the friends. And though Finn often stood in the spotlight, sword raised high, Jake's quiet grin beside him was just as much a symbol of hope, because everyone knew that a hero's journey is never walked alone, and Jake was the proof of that truth. What made Jake's companionship remarkable was how natural it felt. He didn't force himself into the role of protector or teacher. He didn't seek to define himself as Finn's guardian. He simply lived beside him, filling the silence with music, filling the battles with laughter, and filling the spaces between with love. It was this effortless companionship that made their bond so enduring. And as they stepped further into adolescence, the adventures grew more dangerous, the lessons more profound. Finn began to wrestle with questions of identity, of morality, of what it truly meant to be a hero. And in every moment, Jake was there. Not always with the answers, but always with the comfort of presence. Sometimes that was more important than answers could ever be. As the seasons of their youth unfolded, the land of Uu itself seemed to shape their bond. Every kingdom carried its own lessons, every quest deepened their connection, and every friendship tested the strength of their brotherhood. Finn sought to be the champion of the innocent, the sword that defended the weak. Jake, however, saw himself less as a warrior and more as the thread that tied everything together. He wasn't chasing destiny. He was chasing balance. And in the quiet folds of their adventures, that balance often saved them both. In battle, their roles seemed obvious. Finn rushed in with his sword gleaming, while Jake stretched and shifted to protect him. But what often went unseen was how much Jake's heart guided Finn through these trials. He never barked orders, never claimed authority. Instead, he supported Finn's choices, allowing him to stumble, to learn, and to grow. Jake believed in Finn not just as a fighter, but as a person. And that belief became a lantern Finn carried even in his darkest hours. One of the most striking things about their companionship was the rhythm of their daily lives. The moments outside of adventure often told the truer story. Their treehouse, perched high and cozy, became the symbol of their bond. Morning sunlight spilling through branches, Jake already cooking breakfast while Finn stumbled in with messy hair. Afternoons filled with training, Jake stretching into different shapes to spar with Finn, or pretending to be monsters so Finn could test his skills. Evenings spent strumming instruments together, Jake's viola humming low while Finn sang half-finished songs. These simple, repeated moments stitched their brotherhood into something indestructible. There were times, of course, when Finn's eagerness for glory clashed with Jake's preference for ease. Finn would charge into a dungeon, eyes alight with determination, while Jake lagged behind, muttering about wanting a nap or some food instead. To an outsider, it may have seemed like Jake lacked seriousness. But when the moment of truth arrived, Jake was always there, stretching his body into shields, ladders, or colossal fists. His laziness was never neglect. It was perspective. He knew when to save his energy, when to hold back, and when to unleash his full strength. That patience, disguised as indifference, often turned the tide of their battles. Finn sometimes grew frustrated with Jake's calm, especially when facing enemies who seemed unstoppable. But later, when fear passed and the dust settled, Finn always realized how much he had leaned on his brother's presence. Jake's humor, his steadiness, his refusal to panic, these were the invisible supports that made Finn's heroism possible. Without Jake, Finn might have become reckless, consumed by the weight of being a hero. With Jake, he learned to smile, to step back, and to see that life was more than endless battles. What Jake offered wasn't just protection. It was perspective. He reminded Finn that saving the world also meant savoring it, that a sunrise mattered just as much as a victory, that music could heal wounds just as much as a sword, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was rest. These lessons weren't dramatic speeches. They were small, casual comments, delivered with Jake's trademark shrug, words that might sound lazy but hid great wisdom. Over time, Finn realized that his brother's easygoing philosophy was shaping him just as much as any adventure did. And Jake, in turn, was changed by Finn. Without his human brother's determination, Jake might have drifted through life happy but aimless. Finn's fire lit something inside of him, nudging him to rise, to stretch farther, to fight harder. Jake didn't need heroism for himself, but for Finn's sake, he embraced it. That was the essence of their companionship. Two souls pulling each other into balance, one toward action, the other toward peace. The world of Ooh began to recognize them not as individuals, but as a pair. Where Finn's name was spoken, Jake's followed. They became legends in small villages and great kingdoms alike, remembered not only for their victories, but for the way they carried themselves. People saw Finn's sword and Jake's smile, Finn's charge and Jake's calm, and realized they were witnessing more than just adventurers. They were seeing a bond that defied the loneliness of the world after the Great Mushroom War. In a land scarred by destruction, their brotherhood was proof that love and loyalty could still flourish. Their companionship carried a kind of magic beyond Jake's stretching powers or Finn's bravery. It was the magic of presence, of never walking alone, of knowing someone would always be there to share the burden and the joy alike. And that kind of magic, though quieter than a spell or a sword strike, was perhaps the strongest in all of Ooh. As the years passed, their adventures grew larger, their enemies stronger, and their choices heavier. Yet no matter how vast the challenge, the pattern remained. Finn, eager and bold, stepping into the unknown, and Jake, steady and smiling, close behind. The hero and his companion, the brother and his guide, the flame and the calm. Together, they became the heartbeat of the land of Ooh, and it was only the beginning. There came a time when the rhythm of their adventures became so familiar that it felt like the very heartbeat of Ooh itself. From the Candy Kingdom to the Fire Kingdom, from the depths of underground dungeons to the heights of cosmic realms, Finn and Jake moved as one. Wherever Finn's sword pointed, Jake was already there to stretch into the shape he needed most. Wherever Jake cracked a joke or played a tune, Finn's laughter carried through, even in the middle of chaos. Their companionship wasn't just a detail in their lives, it was the foundation of everything they did. The rest of the world began to see it too. Princess Bubblegum would often call on Finn and Jake not as separate allies, but as a unit. Villagers whispered their names together like one word. Finn and Jake. The heroes who always showed up. The brothers who could never be broken apart. Even Ice King, who so often played the role of their bumbling adversary, recognized them as a pair he could never divide, no matter how many schemes he tried to pull. Their names became a kind of melody sung across Ooh, a duet of courage and calm. What made their bond so enduring was how it lived beyond the adventures. In the quiet moments, when Finn nursed his wounds after a hard fight, or when doubts crept in about what it meant to be a hero, it was Jake who steadied him. Not through grand speeches or declarations, but through the simplest of comforts, a song on the viola, a hot plate of food, a lazy smile that told Finn everything would be all right. Sometimes Jake's words seemed too casual for the gravity of the moment. But beneath that casualness was wisdom born of living, of seeing the world not as something to conquer, but as something to enjoy. And when Jake faltered, Finn gave back just as much. Jake's nature leaned toward ease, sometimes toward apathy. Without Finn, it would have been easy for him to drift through life without aim, filling his days with naps and snacks. But Finn's drive pushed him higher. Finn's unshakable determination reminded Jake that even the most relaxed soul can rise to greatness when it matters. Their companionship was never one-sided. It was a constant exchange, each brother shaping the other into something fuller, something stronger. Through their partnership, Ooh itself became a little brighter. Monsters were defeated, kingdoms were saved, friendships were forged. But perhaps more importantly, the people of Ooh witnessed something rare, a love so steady it seemed unbreakable. For a world still haunted by the scars of the Mushroom War, this was no small thing. Their bond was proof that even in a land of chaos and mutation, something as pure as brotherhood could endure. There were moments when this bond was tested. Times when Finn grew frustrated with Jake's lack of urgency, or when Jake worried that Finn's reckless heart would break. Yet these moments only deepened their connection. They argued, they stumbled, but they always found their way back. Because at the core of everything was love, not a soft or fleeting love, but the kind that anchors a soul through storms. Jake's role as the brother and companion wasn't about leading Finn or following him. It was about walking beside him, step for step, through whatever lay ahead. He was not Finn's shadow, nor his guide on a leash. He was something subtler, a steady presence that reminded Finn that he was never alone. That reminder, whispered in every battle and every quiet night, became the true strength behind Finn's heroism. And so, as tales of their adventures spread, the image of Finn the human and Jake the dog became inseparable. One could not be imagined without the other. Together, they stood as symbols not just of adventure, but of the bond that holds life together in even the strangest of worlds. Finn gave Jake purpose. Jake gave Finn peace. Finn reached for glory. Jake reminded him to laugh. Their companionship was the thread that tied their lives into a single story, one that wove through every kingdom, every battle, every song. It was not dramatic or flashy, but it was constant, reliable, and unshakable. And in a land as unpredictable as Ooh, that constancy was a kind of magic all its own. By the time their names were known across every corner of the land, their partnership had become more than just a tale of two brothers. It had become a promise that even in a world fractured by apocalypse, even in a place where magic and danger bent reality itself, love and loyalty could still create something steady, something whole. This was Jake's greatest role in those years. The brother, the companion, the one who laughed in the face of danger and stretched himself not just across battlefields, but across the very fabric of Finn's life. And as Ooh grew stranger and their adventures grew darker, it was this role that would continue to define him, carrying them both into the next chapters of their journey. Love in Jake's story came quietly at first, like the gentle notes of a song carried on the evening wind. He had always been a creature of ease, flowing through life with a smile and a stretch, never rushing to chase destiny or define himself too sharply. And then came the Lady Rainicorn, Their bond began not with grand declarations, but with simple moments. Time spent together, laughter shared, and the soft recognition that two very different beings could find harmony in each other. Rainicorn was everything Jake was not. Graceful where he was goofy, luminous where he was earthy, her presence brought a new kind of light into his life. Their differences could have driven them apart. Her ethereal, almost otherworldly nature standing in stark contrast to Jake's laid-back humor. Yet instead those differences became their bridge. She found comfort in his steady warmth, and he found wonder in her vibrant, shifting world. In Ooh, where boundaries of race, species, and origin were already blurred, their love was not an oddity. It was a reminder that connection could transcend all categories. When they first began courting, Jake was still very much a wanderer, adventuring with Finn across kingdoms and dungeons. But Rainicorn brought out another side of him. She reminded him that adventure wasn't only found in faraway places. It was also found in the quiet of companionship. Time with her grounded him, softening his rougher edges. The playful dog, who once spent his days stretching into chairs and giant fists, began to dream of softer things, shared meals, long walks, and a future not only filled with quests, but with family. And family did come, in its most unexpected, joyful form. Jake and Rainicorn's children were unlike anything Ooh had ever seen. Each pup carried pieces of both parents, a blend of Jake's earthy magic and Rainicorn's celestial beauty. Charlie, the eldest, bore a calm and mystical air, as if she had already glimpsed truths far beyond the present. TV, the laid-back son, seemed to inherit Jake's fondness for leisure, preferring a good nap to a dangerous quest. Viola carried a touch of artistry, sensitive and expressive. Kim Kil-wan, the most grounded of them all, longed for stability and structure, in many ways the opposite of Jake. And then there was Jake Jr., sharp-witted and independent, carving her own path almost from the moment she could stand. For Jake, fatherhood was not about control. He did not try to mold his children into what he thought they should be. Instead, he gave them freedom. He watched them grow into themselves, supporting them with love, but never suffocating them with expectation. This, too, reflected his philosophy of life, that existence is meant to stretch and shift naturally, without being forced into rigid shapes. Just as he bent and twisted his own body with ease, he allowed his children's identities to bend into whatever forms they wished. Yet being a father brought Jake moments of reflection he had never known before. Seeing his children grow reminded him of time's steady march, of how quickly seasons pass. His carefree nature meant he rarely thought of the future, but now, with pups of his own, he began to glimpse it. The world was not only his playground anymore, it was their inheritance. His responsibility to them wasn't about protecting them from every harm. It was about teaching them, through his own example, that love and joy were the true treasures of life. His relationship with Kim Kil-wan, in particular, revealed this side of him. Kim Kil-wan valued structure, safety, and tradition, often clashing with Jake's free-spirited approach. Where Jake laughed and drifted, Kim Kil-wan planned and worried. Their differences created tension, but also opportunities for growth. Jake learned that love sometimes meant compromise, that being a father was not always easy or simple. Kim Kil-wan, in turn, learned to respect his father's wisdom, an understanding that stability alone could not nourish the heart, and that joy had its own kind of strength. In the swirl of family life, Jake never abandoned Finn. Their adventures continued, but Jake's priorities began to balance differently. He no longer lived only for the thrill of the quest. He lived also for the quiet mornings with Rainicorn, for the moments when his children called his name, for the gentle reminder that life is not measured only by victories, but by the bonds we nurture. This shift did not make him less of a hero. In many ways, it made him more. Jake became a fuller presence, his wisdom deepened by love, his patience sharpened by the lessons of fatherhood. The once carefree pup who floated through life now carried the weight of family with grace. And though he still stretched into silly shapes and cracked jokes in battle, there was a new depth in his eyes, a recognition that his adventures mattered not only for himself but for those who looked up to him, those who carried his legacy forward. Jake's love for Rainicorn and his devotion to his children became proof that even in the strange post-apocalyptic land of Ooh, love was not only possible, it was essential. It was love that turned ruins into homes, love that stitched together unlikely bonds, love that gave meaning to the chaos. And for Jake, it was love that revealed his truest form, not the stretch of his body, but the stretch of his heart. Fatherhood for Jake was never about trying to appear perfect. He wasn't the kind of dad who drew up rules on the wall or gave long speeches about responsibility. Instead, his lessons came in smaller, subtler ways. Sometimes it was a quiet nudge, sometimes a joke that carried more truth than it seemed, and other times it was simply the way he lived, showing his children that kindness, loyalty, and laughter could carry them further than fear ever could. Each of his pups reflected back something different about him. Charlie, who grew into a mysterious and almost prophetic figure, seemed to understand from the start that her father's strangeness was not just physical. She carried a sense of wonder about the universe, and in her, Jake could see how even the oddest beginnings could blossom into wisdom. He never tried to interfere with her explorations of the mystical. He trusted her to walk her path, knowing that she carried within her the same curiosity that had guided him through childhood. TV, his son with a taste for leisure and comfort, might have been the truest mirror of Jake's own younger self. He preferred rest over action, long days of ease over adventures. At first, Jake chuckled and encouraged it, but as he watched TV grow, he realized that too much detachment could leave a soul adrift. Without pressing too hard, Jake reminded his son that life was richer when shared, that even leisure is sweeter when it's balanced with love and purpose. Viola carried the tender soul of an artist, sketching her emotions into music and lines. With her, Jake saw the value of expression, of giving the inner world a voice. He encouraged her work without judgment, showing her that even in a chaotic land like Ooh, there was space for beauty and vulnerability. Viola was a reminder that love is not only laughter, it is also the courage to create something fragile in a world that often feels unkind. Kim Kill. Juan remained the most complex of his children, the one who pushed Jake the hardest. Where Jake embraced fluidity, Kim Kill Juan craved structure. He sought a stable home, a traditional family, and the assurance of safety. Their disagreements sometimes stung, but beneath them lay a deep mutual respect. Jake, though free-spirited, understood that his son's need for order was not a rejection of him, but a reflection of the uncertainty that still haunted Ooh. And Kim Kill Juan, though frustrated by Jake's looseness, eventually came to see that his father's wisdom carried its own strength. Together, their push and pull formed a bond as real as any adventure. Then there was Jake Jr., bold, clever, and fiercely independent. She seemed to embody the fire of both her parents, carrying Lady Rainicorn's brilliance and Jake's resilience. Jake loved her courage, but it also reminded him of the delicate balance between bravery and recklessness. Watching her grow was like watching a flame, beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to contain. With her, Jake learned that fatherhood sometimes meant letting go, trusting that his children could carry themselves even when the world grew sharp. Through all of these relationships, Jake remained true to his heart. He didn't worry about being the perfect father because he understood something deeper. Perfection was never the point. Presence was. Love was. And in every stretch of his body, in every laugh he shared, in every meal he cooked or story he told, Jake gave his family the one thing he had always been given himself, the assurance that they were not alone. Being a father also deepened his bond with Rainicorn. Their love, once playful and new, grew into something layered with trust and shared responsibility. They faced the challenges of raising children in a world still strange and uncertain, but they did so together, blending their strengths. Rainicorn's wisdom and patience complemented Jake's warmth and humor, and together they created a home where their pups could grow in freedom. And while Jake never abandoned his life of adventure with Finn, he carried his family with him wherever he went. In his thoughts, in his heart, in the choices he made on the battlefield. Every victory, every lesson, every song he played was now part of a larger story. The story of the family that looked to him with love and pride. For Jake, love and fatherhood did not mean leaving adventure behind. They meant redefining what adventure truly was. Not just dungeons and battles, but also the quiet miracle of watching your children grow. Not just saving kingdoms, but also holding your partner close and laughing under the stars. Through love and family, Jake's world expanded in ways even his stretching powers could never match. As Jake's children grew, the meaning of adventure itself began to shift for him. Once the thrill of leaping into danger at Finn's side had been enough. The sparkle of discovery, the rush of a battle won, the laughter of a victory feast. Those had been the heartbeat of his days. But now there was something quieter, something deeper calling him. It was the sound of tiny paws scurrying across the floor, the glow of Rainicorn's smile at the end of a long day, the feeling of being needed, not just as a fighter, but as a father. This didn't mean Jake abandoned the hero's path. He still stretched himself across battlefields, still cracked jokes in the middle of danger, still held the line whenever Finn called his name. But he carried with him the awareness that his life wasn't only his own anymore. Every choice rippled outward, to Rainicorn, to his pups, to the future he was building in the small, tender moments of home. In the same way that Jake once stretched his body, he now stretched his heart, expanding it to hold both worlds at once, the wild chaos of ooh and the fragile, precious circle of family. There were times when these worlds clashed. Finn's youthful energy often demanded Jake's full attention, pulling him into quests that lasted days, even weeks. Meanwhile, his children grew without him always present, learning their lessons, forming their paths, sometimes stumbling in ways Jake wished he could have guided more closely. This tension weighed on him, though he rarely showed it. On the surface, Jake remained the same easygoing figure, laughing, playing music, dozing in the sunlight. But in his quiet moments, he reflected on the cost of being stretched in two directions, hero and father. It was during these reflections that Jake's wisdom deepened. He began to see that fatherhood wasn't about being present every second. It was about leaving behind something lasting, values, love, resilience, that would guide his children even when he wasn't there. He had learned this himself from Joshua and Margaret. They hadn't always been perfect, but they had given him the tools to grow into who he was. Now he carried that forward, trusting his children to grow strong, not because he controlled them, but because he loved them. This philosophy was tested most with Kim, Kil, Juan. Their disagreements about stability and responsibility forced Jake to consider perspectives he had never entertained before. Kim, Kil, Juan believed in building solid foundations, steady work, a safe home, a life with fewer risks. To him, Jake's relaxed approach seemed careless, even selfish. These conflicts weren't easy, but Jake never turned away. He listened, even if he didn't always agree, and he learned that love sometimes meant sitting in discomfort, facing truths you would rather stretch away from. And in the end, even with their differences, there was respect, because both father and son, in their own ways, wanted to protect what mattered most. The other pups brought him gentler lessons. Charlie's mystical wanderings showed Jake that some paths cannot be guided, only supported. Viola's creativity reminded him that the heart's expressions are as vital as the body's survival. Jake Jr.'s fiery independence challenged him to trust, to let go of control even when it scared him. And TV, with his sleepy contentment, mirrored Jake's own temptation toward idleness, pushing him to consider when comfort becomes stagnation. Each child was a reflection, a mirror held up to parts of himself, some parts he loved, others he struggled with, but all of them taught him that love means embracing every reflection, no matter how imperfect. Through all of this, Rainicorn remained his anchor. Their love matured into a partnership defined not just by passion, but by trust. They leaned on each other, balancing one another's weaknesses, celebrating each other's strengths. Where Jake sometimes drifted into ease, Rainicorn's steadiness pulled him back. Where Rainicorn sometimes carried the weight of worry, Jake's laughter lightened her steps. Together they created a family that thrived not because it was flawless, but because it was real. In the broader world of Ooh, their love carried its own quiet symbolism. A dog and a Rainicorn, two beings so different in form, language, and nature, had created a bond strong enough to nurture new life. In a land fractured by apocalypse and mutation, where difference often bred conflict, their relationship stood as a reminder that love could bridge any divide. It was not a love that erased differences. It was a love that honored them, weaving them into something greater. Jake's family life didn't dull his role as a hero. If anything, it sharpened it. Every battle fought, every quest completed, now carried with it the knowledge that he was fighting not only for himself or Finn, but for the home he returned to. His loyalty to Finn remained unshaken, but now it was balanced by the love he held for Rainicorn and their children. That balance didn't weaken him, it deepened him, making every choice more meaningful. And so Jake the dog, once a carefree adventurer, content to float through life on naps and jokes, became something more profound. He became a father who stretched himself across worlds, adventurer, partner, parent, and found that the true magic of his powers wasn't in the shapes he could take, but in the love he could hold. As the years passed, Jake's role as both hero and father intertwined more and more, until it became impossible to separate the two. To the people of Ooh, he was one half of the legendary adventuring duo, always at Finn's side, stretching across battlefields and strumming soft tunes by campfires. But to his children, he was something quieter, gentler, and infinitely more profound. He was the warmth that greeted them at home, the laughter that filled their evenings, the presence that reminded them that no matter how strange or dangerous the world became, they were safe in his love. Jake never saw fatherhood as a burden, even when it demanded more from him than he expected, even when the weight of responsibility pressed down. He treated it as another kind of adventure, an adventure that asked him to stretch not his body, but his patience, his wisdom, his heart. In this way, his family became his greatest quest, one without monsters or dungeons, but with challenges just as daunting, learning to listen, learning to trust, and learning to let go. One of the quiet truths about Jake was how much he embraced imperfection. He knew he wasn't flawless. He could be lazy, distracted, even careless at times. But instead of hiding those flaws, He allowed his children to see them, to know that love didn't require perfection. It required presence. It required showing up again and again, even when tired, even when uncertain. And because of this, his children grew up not with an idealized version of a hero for a father, but with a real one. A father who made mistakes, laughed at them, and kept moving forward with love. There were moments, of course, when Jake reflected on how far he had come from his own mysterious beginnings. Born of a bite that could not be explained, shaped by magic that blurred the line between monster and miracle. Jake could easily have become a creature defined by strangeness, but family had changed everything. Just as Joshua and Margaret had once welcomed him without hesitation, Jake now poured that same acceptance into his children. In doing so, he closed the circle of his story, proving that love could transform even the most uncertain of origins into a legacy of joy. His bond with Rainicorn only grew stronger through the years. Their love was not perfect, but it was resilient. They had arguments, they had differences, yet they always found their way back to each other. And as their children grew and began to walk their own paths, Jake and Rainicorn discovered that love was not just about raising a family together. It was about continuing to choose each other, day after day, in the midst of change. Their relationship became a living reminder that love itself is a form of adventure, one that requires courage, patience, and endless curiosity. Finn, too, remained a constant part of this tapestry. While Jake built his family, he never abandoned his brother. If anything, Finn became a beloved uncle to Jake's children, and the adventures they shared as a larger family carried a new warmth. Their bond expanded outward, proving that family isn't just who you're born to or even who you raise. It's also who you choose, who you walk beside, who you laugh with when the world feels heavy. In the end, what defined this chapter of Jake's life wasn't just the battles won or the quests completed. It was the love he cultivated. Love for Rainicorn, love for his pups, love for Finn, love for the world he called home. This love became his legacy, one that stretched far beyond his physical powers. It reached into the lives of everyone who knew him, everyone who was touched by his laughter, his music, his calm wisdom. Jake's journey into fatherhood revealed something essential about who he was. Beneath the jokes, beneath the naps, beneath the stretchy skin and magical powers, Jake was a being who understood that life's greatest treasures are found not in crowns or victories, but in the bonds we nurture. His story teaches us that even in a land as strange and chaotic as Ooh, family can grow, love can thrive, and joy can endure. And so the dog born of mystery, the brother who stood at Finn's side, became also the father who showed that love is the truest adventure of all. With Rainicorn, with his children, with his brother, Jake stretched his heart across generations, weaving a story that would live on long after the battles were forgotten. This was Jake the father, Jake the partner, Jake the dog who turned a strange beginning into a life filled with love. And from here, his journey would shift again toward questions even greater. For Jake's powers were more than playful tricks. They were hints of something cosmic, something vast. His family grounded him, but the universe itself seemed to whisper his name. And soon, Jake the father and Jake the brother would begin to glimpse Jake the cosmic. Jake's powers had always been there, woven to the very fabric of his being. From the moment he could crawl, he was stretching and reshaping himself into whatever form his imagination demanded. At first it was a game, turning into a chair to startle Germaine, puffing up like a balloon to make Finn laugh, slipping under locked doors just to snag a cookie jar. To those who loved him, it was simply Jake being Jake, a playful pup who happened to be made of magic. But as the years passed, his abilities began to hint at something larger, something almost cosmic. Jake wasn't just flexible. He wasn't just magical. He was something else entirely, something that seemed to blur the boundaries between body and soul, between matter and imagination. His powers weren't an accessory or a weapon. They were him. His body was not a fixed thing, but a canvas, endlessly reshaping itself according to will. Few others in Ooh possessed such an ability, and even fewer seemed to wield it with the casual ease that Jake did. What made Jake remarkable was not only the scope of what he could do, but how little he seemed to question it. Where another might have obsessed over origins or limits, Jake shrugged, laughed, and turned himself into a giant duck or a towering brick wall. He lived as if his powers were simply a natural extension of his personality, easygoing, adaptable, playful. And yet deep within, there were moments when his abilities hinted at a truth he didn't fully acknowledge, that he wasn't just stretching his body. He was bending the very rules of reality. There were times, in the heat of battle or in the quiet of dreams, when Jake's powers seemed to slip into something stranger. He could inflate himself until his skin was paper-thin without bursting. He could compress himself into shapes so dense they seemed heavier than they should be. He could expand, shrink, twist, and ripple in ways that defied not only biology, but the laws of physics themselves. More than once, he stretched across spaces so vast it was unclear where his body began or ended, almost as if his form wasn't bound by the world at all, but by something deeper, an idea of existence itself. The origins of these powers had always been mysterious. Joshua's strange bite, the magical event that brought Jake into the world, remained a story without a clear explanation. Was the creature that bit Joshua simply a magical monster? Or was it something older, something tied to Ooh's cosmic tapestry? The answer was never given, but hints scattered through Jake's life suggested that his powers connected him to forces beyond the ordinary. Some fans believe Jake's abilities echo the malleability of the universe itself. In Ooh, where chaos and creation often blur, Jake may represent the principle of change, the reminder that nothing is fixed, and everything can stretch into something new. His form mirrored his philosophy. Just as he never overthought his place in the world, his body never clung to one shape. To live, for Jake, was to adapt, to stretch, to flow. And yet, even if he didn't seek answers, the universe sometimes brought them to him. In his dreams, Jake occasionally glimpsed things he couldn't explain. Visions of himself stretching across stars, floating in the void, expanding until he seemed to touch infinity. And he never spoke of these dreams with the weight of prophecy. Instead, he brushed them off with a chuckle, calling them weird sleep stuff. But to those who saw the hints, it was clear. Jake's powers weren't simply playful tricks. They were windows into something vast, a connection between the earthly and the cosmic. Still, Jake rarely allowed the mystery to trouble him. Where others might have sought to unravel the truth of such visions, he simply continued to live his life as he always had. He played music, cooked meals, napped under trees, and stretched himself into whatever form the moment required. It was as if he instinctively understood that chasing answers would only complicate what was already simple. He was Jake, and that was enough. But the truth lingered, like a faint hum beneath the surface of his laughter. His body was more than flesh. It was possibility itself. And as time went on, both Finn and Jake, and even the world of Ooh, would come to realize just how profound that possibility truly was. The strangeness of Jake's powers became more obvious as his adventures with Finn grew more dangerous. When a simple stretch of his arm was no longer enough, he discovered that his body could adapt in ways even he hadn't imagined. In dungeons where walls pressed inward, Jake could flatten himself paper-thin and slip through cracks. In battles against towering monsters, he could grow into a giant, his fists the size of boulders, his voice echoing through the air. When Finn needed cover, Jake could turn himself into a shield or even a full suit of armor, wrapping his stretchy body around his brother like a second skin. It was in these moments that Finn often looked at him with wide-eyed wonder. For Finn, Jake wasn't just a companion. He was living proof that the impossible could be made ordinary. Yet Jake never let the awe go to his head. To him, these transformations weren't about showing power. They were about helping, about being there for the people he loved. That was the quiet truth of Jake's abilities. No matter how cosmic they seemed, he used them for the simplest of reasons, to protect, to comfort, to laugh. There were also stranger instances, times when Jake's powers revealed qualities that seemed less like magic and more like glimpses into a cosmic order. On several occasions, Jake divided himself into multiple versions, each with its own personality, as though his essence could fragment and multiply without losing coherence. In other moments, he transformed into objects that defied logic, stretching into entire landscapes or mimicking complex machines. These weren't the abilities of a normal shapeshifter. They hinted at something deeper, something that made even the most magical beings of Ooh take notice. Creatures sensitive to the flows of reality often reacted strangely around him. Some backed away as though they recognized him, not as Jake the dog, but as something older and greater. Others treated him with reverence, speaking to him in tones of respect, usually reserved for cosmic entities like Prismo or Orgalorg. Jake himself remained blissfully unaware of the implications. He laughed it off, dismissing their odd behavior as just another quirk of Ooh. But the pattern was undeniable. His existence resonated beyond the ordinary plane. It was Finn who sometimes pushed Jake to consider the mystery more seriously. Finn, ever curious and eager for answers, would ask where his powers really came from. He wanted to know what Jake was, why he could bend his body beyond the rules of nature. But Jake would shrug, scratch his belly, and say something simple like, "I'm just me, man." To Jake, the question wasn't worth the worry. His powers weren't a burden or a destiny. They were just part of his life, no different from the way Finn swung a sword or bubblegum mixed potions. Yet the ease with which Jake dismissed these questions was perhaps its own kind of wisdom. He seemed to understand something Finn did not, that knowing the answer wasn't as important as living the truth. To Jake, identity wasn't about definitions or labels. It was about presence. He didn't need to know if he was connected to some cosmic being or ancient power. He only needed to know that he loved his brother, his partner, his children. That was enough. And still the hints kept arriving. Dreams of infinity, visions of himself stretching across time, the strange respect he received from entities who usually ignored mortals. All of these suggested that Jake's powers connected him to a reality far larger than he chose to admit. Whether he liked it or not, he was more than just a shapeshifter. He was a being whose essence bent the very laws of the universe. But Jake never let this knowledge, or even the suspicion of it, change who he was. If anything, it reinforced his outlook. To him, life's greatest mystery wasn't meant to be solved with charts or prophecies. It was meant to be lived, one stretch at a time, one laugh at a time, one song played softly under the stars. And in that simple way of being, Jake revealed a kind of cosmic truth, that the universe itself, no matter how vast or strange, could be held together by love, by laughter, by family. His body might have been fluid, capable of turning into anything, but his heart remained constant. And in that constancy, Jake carried the essence of something truly eternal. As time passed, Jake's abilities only grew more uncanny. What began as practical tricks for play and protection revealed layers that seemed to echo the very fabric of existence. He could stretch beyond mountains, his body elongating until it was hard to tell where Jake ended and the horizon began. He could shrink so small that he was nearly invisible, yet his essence remained intact, as if size itself held no authority over him. His body could harden into steel, soften into water, or ripple like firelight. There seemed to be no limit, and yet Jake treated all of it with the same casual shrug, as though these miracles were nothing more than a nap interrupted. One of the most mysterious displays of his powers was his ability to shapeshift into things that carried memory or essence, not just form. He could mimic voices, gestures, even subtle details of creatures he had only glimpsed. It was as though his body remembered not only shapes, but truths, as if he were tapping into a deeper stream of reality where all forms were connected. He never claimed to understand how this worked, and he never studied it. But the effect was undeniable. Jake could become almost anything, because at some level, he was already part of everything. The people of Ooh often treated this with awe. When Finn and Jake ventured into other kingdoms, residents would marvel at the dog who could be a boat one moment, a tower the next, and a blanket of comfort in the quiet after. They saw his powers as magic. But those who lived closer to the edges of Ooh's cosmic mysteries sensed something greater. They looked at Jake with an unease that bordered on reverence. Beings like Prismo, who existed outside linear time, seemed to recognize Jake as a kindred spirit in some subtle way. Even the cosmic owl, drifting through the dreams of mortals, seemed to give Jake's visions a peculiar weight. What stood out most was how lightly Jake carried all this. He never let cosmic hints define him. Where others might spiral into existential dread, he took a bite of a sandwich and said, "It's fine." He seemed to embody a truth that wisdom wasn't about having all the answers, but about knowing which questions mattered. And for Jake, the only questions that mattered were, am I living with love? Am I here for my family? Am I having fun while I can? Still, there were moments when the enormity of his powers brushed against him more directly. Dreams of stretching across galaxies returned, sometimes leaving him quiet when he awoke. Once when Finn asked what the dream had been, Jake simply said, "I was real big, man. Like everything big." Finn laughed. But Jake's eyes lingered on the horizon that morning, thoughtful in a way he rarely showed. He knew perhaps more deeply than he admitted that his powers weren't just tricks. They were glimpses of something eternal, something that tied him to the cosmos as surely as his paws tied him to the earth. The paradox of Jake was that he was both ordinary and extraordinary. On one hand, he loved simple pleasures, naps in the sun, making bacon pancakes, and joking with Finn. On the other, he carried within him a connection that few mortals or even immortals could claim. This tension gave him a quiet depth. He didn't need to proclaim himself cosmic. He simply lived it, stretching not only his body, but his life across love, laughter, and meaning. And perhaps that was Jake's greatest gift. Where others sought to control power, he embodied acceptance. Where others chased after destiny, he chose presence. His shape-shifting wasn't only physical, it was spiritual. A reminder that existence itself is fluid, that we are all more than one thing, that identity is not a prison, but a song that shifts with the melody of time. Jake never lectured these truths, never declared them with solemnity. He taught them in the way he hugged Finn after a hard day, in the way he let his children find their own paths, in the way he curled beside Rainicorn beneath the stars. Every stretch of his body was also a stretch of philosophy. To be many things and yet still be yourself, to bend without breaking, to find joy even in strangeness. It was no wonder that when the truly cosmic beings of Ooh crossed paths with Jake, they treated him with a peculiar acknowledgement. They seemed to see in him a reflection of their own vastness, cloaked in the unassuming form of a dog. Jake was cosmic, yes, but his cosmic nature was softened by his choice to live small, to live close to love, to live in laughter. And in that choice he revealed a truth that even the stars themselves might envy, that the greatest power is not stretching across infinity, but stretching your heart across those you hold dear. This chapter of Jake's life, then, was not about uncovering the secrets of his origin. It was about showing that origin doesn't have to define destiny. Jake the shapeshifter was also Jake the cosmic. But above all, he was Jake the brother, the father, the partner, the friend. The universe might have whispered his name, but Jake's laughter whispered louder. There came a point in Jake's life when the whispers of his cosmic nature grew too clear to ignore. The adventures he and Finn embarked upon took them beyond the forests and valleys of Ooh into realms where time flowed differently, where existence itself seemed to bend and ripple. In those places, Jake's powers didn't feel like tricks anymore. They felt natural, as if he belonged there just as much as the stars or the endless void. When they met beings like Prismo, who resided outside of time, Jake's connection to something greater became unmistakable. Prismo, who had seen countless realities unfold, spoke to Jake with a familiarity that seemed deeper than casual friendship. It was as if Prismo recognized him, not just as Finn's partner, but as a fellow participant in the cosmic dance. While Finn struggled to grasp the vastness of Prismo's realm, Jake seemed almost at ease, lounging as if he had been there 1,000 times before. It wasn't arrogance, it was comfort, an instinct that told him he wasn't out of place in infinity. Other encounters, too, revealed glimpses of Jake's deeper essence. When visions came to him in dreams, they weren't merely strange, they were prophetic, layered with symbols of birth, death, and the endless cycle in between. When Finn asked him about these visions, Jake often dismissed them with a grin and a lazy wave of the hand. But behind that casualness was a quiet knowing. He understood, perhaps more than he let on, that his life was threaded into the same tapestry as the cosmic entities who shaped the universe. Jake's powers also carried with them a hidden fragility, though not in the way one might expect. His body could bend and twist into anything, but his heart remained tethered to the people he loved. That tether was both his strength and his limit. While he might have been able to stretch across infinity, he never wanted to. His place was with Finn, with Rainicorn, with his children. The universe might have whispered its call, but Jake's answer was always the same: love over destiny, presence over prophecy. Still, the idea of Jake as a cosmic being lingers in the minds of many who reflect on his story. Could his powers have made him something akin to Prismo or Orgalorg if he had pursued them? Was he a fragment of some greater force, sent into Ooh through that fateful bite that created his life? Or was he simply a product of chaos, a miracle born of mutation in a broken world? The show never gives a clear answer, and perhaps that ambiguity is the point. Jake himself never chased clarity. He lived with mystery the way he lived with everything else, lightly, playfully, without fear. The truth is, Jake's cosmic essence was not about what he could have become. It was about what he chose to be. In a world where power often corrupts, where knowledge of cosmic truths leads to obsession or despair, Jake remained grounded. His greatest wisdom was knowing when to stop stretching, when to curl back into the arms of his loved ones and simply be. The stars might have been within reach, but he preferred the glow of the treehouse lantern, the warmth of his pups nestled beside him, the laughter of Finn echoing in the night. That is what made Jake truly cosmic. Not the scale of his powers and not the strange dreams of infinity, but the way he brought those vast possibilities down into the ordinary moments of life. He showed that the infinite is not only found in galaxies, but in love shared between brothers, in the bond of family, in the choice to smile when the world grows heavy. His body stretched across impossible distances, but his heart stretched further still, into places that no cosmic being could measure. So when we think of Jake the shapeshifter, Jake the cosmic, we are not just speaking of his powers. We are speaking of a philosophy embodied in fur and laughter. To bend without breaking, to change without losing yourself, to hold infinity in one hand and a friend's hand in the other. In this way, Jake stood as both mortal and eternal, both playful pup and cosmic wonder. And though he never claimed the title, Jake's story quietly suggests that the universe itself may have chosen him to carry this truth. That sometimes the greatest cosmic beings are not the ones who rule the stars, but the ones who choose to sit beside you, play a song, and remind you that life, in all its strangeness, is still worth loving. From here, Jake's journey would begin to face heavier shadows. For even a being as free and fluid as Jake could not escape the weight of time, the march of age, and the reality of mortality. And it was in facing those truths that Jake's story would deepen yet again, showing us not only the stretch of his powers, but the stretch of his spirit in the face of life's greatest challenges. As Jake grew older, the tone of his story began to change. The carefree pup who once stretched himself into castles and boats, who laughed in the face of danger and napped under trees without a worry, slowly found himself reflecting on the weight of time. He was still Jake, still playful, still wise in his easygoing way, but the adventures he shared with Finn carried new shades. Where once the joy of discovery was enough, now each battle, each quest, each quiet night afterward held lessons about growing, about losing, about what it means to live fully even as the years slip by. One of Jake's greatest strengths was his ability to see life without panic. Where Finn fretted about destiny, about becoming a great hero, Jake reminded him to take things as they came. Yet this same calmness sometimes masked a deeper truth. Jake, too, was changing. He wasn't immune to the march of time, nor to the pain of loss. And though he often laughed through it, he carried within him a growing awareness that nothing stays the same forever. This awareness often revealed itself in the quiet advice he gave Finn. After a difficult fight, when Finn's frustration bubbled over, Jake would lean back, fold his stretchy arms behind his head, and offer a line so simple it seemed almost careless. But behind those words was the wisdom of someone who had seen enough to know that the world doesn't bend to willpower alone. He taught Finn that being a hero wasn't about winning every battle. It was about showing up, about holding on, about keeping love alive even in loss. There were moments when these lessons hit harder than Jake himself expected. Friends they had grown up with changed. Kingdoms they had visited fell into conflict. And sometimes those they cared for were hurt or gone. Jake, who had always embodied resilience, began to realize that stretching his body couldn't always protect the people he loved. There were wounds that could not be blocked by armor or fists, and sorrows that even the longest arms could not reach to pull back. Yet in the face of these truths, Jake remained steady. He didn't deny loss, but he didn't let it consume him. Instead, he carried it lightly, showing Finn that grief could exist alongside joy, that endings did not erase the beauty of what came before. When Finn struggled with heartbreak or the weight of failure, Jake reminded him that life isn't meant to be perfect. It's meant to be lived, moment by moment, with all its mess and wonder intact. One of the most poignant lessons Jake embodied was the acceptance of impermanence. He didn't cling to youth, nor did he fight against change. He flowed with it, the way his body flowed into new shapes. Just as he could bend without breaking, he believed the heart could stretch too, adapting to the losses and shifts that time inevitably brings. This philosophy became a gift to Finn, who often wrestled with the need to prove himself. Jake's calmness was a reminder that worth isn't measured by victories, but by the love and loyalty you carry through the years. Of course, Jake wasn't untouched by fear. Though he laughed easily, there were moments when silence betrayed him. Moments when he looked at his children growing older, at Finn stepping into adulthood, at the changing face of Ooh, and felt the quiet weight of time pressing on him. He knew he couldn't stretch forever. His body, though miraculous, still carried the same truth every living being must face. One day his story would end. And yet even in acknowledging this, Jake chose not despair, but gratitude. For Jake, the march of time was not a curse but a rhythm, a song that carried both joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. And if he could teach Finn anything, it was that learning to dance to that rhythm was the greatest lesson of all. The adventures that once felt endless began to carry echoes of finality, like the faint ringing of a bell at the close of day. Finn was no longer the wide-eyed boy who had once clung to Jake's stretchy arms in awe. He was growing taller, braver, and more complex in his choices. Jake saw this transformation clearly, and though he cheered for Finn's growth, a part of him felt the bittersweet tug of time. He had always been the older brother, the steady companion, the shield and the guide. Now he watched as Finn slowly stepped into his own role, not just as a hero, but as a man. Jake wasn't jealous of this change, nor resistant to it. Instead, he embraced it with the quiet acceptance that marked his character. He had never needed to be the star of the story. His purpose had always been to be there, to stand beside, to hold space. Watching Finn grow into his own person was a lesson in letting go, in understanding that even bonds as strong as theirs must shift with time. There were trials that drove this lesson home. Battles that once seemed simple became more difficult, their enemies more cunning, their wounds deeper. Finn sometimes came home with heavy questions in his eyes about morality, about justice, about the price of heroism. Jake, ever the philosopher in disguise, offered comfort in his own way. He would tell Finn to eat, to rest, to take a nap before worrying too much. It sounded light, but beneath it was a profound truth. Clarity often comes not from endless struggle, but from allowing yourself to breathe. And then there were the losses. Friends who had stood with them in earlier days drifted away or changed in ways that felt like farewells. The world of Ooh was in constant motion, kingdoms rising and falling like waves on a shore. Jake, who had always been able to physically stretch into any form, began to stretch his heart to adapt to these emotional shifts. He showed Finn that sadness did not have to be avoided. It could be carried gently, without breaking the joy that remained. One of Jake's most powerful lessons came in the way he balanced joy and grief. He could mourn a loss in one moment, and still find a reason to laugh in the next. This wasn't denial, it was resilience. It was the recognition that life never stops moving, and that holding too tightly to sorrow can keep you from seeing the beauty still around you. Finn learned from this balance, realizing that being a hero didn't mean being consumed by pain. It meant carrying pain alongside love and still choosing to move forward. As Finn became more independent, Jake also leaned more into his role as a father. His children were carving their own lives, making choices he couldn't always control. Sometimes they stumbled, sometimes they disagreed with him, sometimes they walked paths Jake didn't fully understand. Yet he approached fatherhood with the same philosophy he brought to everything else. Let them stretch into their own shapes. He loved without smothering, guided without restraining. And in doing so, he revealed yet another lesson. That love is not about possession, but about trust. The march of time also brought Jake into deeper reflection about himself. He had once lived without thinking too much, content to drift on naps and laughter. But as years slipped by, he realized that his choices mattered not only for himself, but for those around him. Every time he picked up his viola to play a soft tune for Finn, every time he wrapped a protective arm around Rainicorn, every time he offered a piece of advice disguised as a joke, those were moments that echoed beyond him. He had become a thread woven into the lives of many, and that realization gave his life a quiet gravity he had never sought, but now embraced. Through all of this, Jake never lost his lightness. He didn't let time weigh him down, even as it reminded him of endings. Instead, he met change with humor, with warmth, with the same gentle presence that had carried him through childhood. In this way, he showed Finn and all who knew him that aging is not about losing who you are. It is about deepening it. It is about holding the same laughter, the same love, even as the world grows heavier. As the years pressed on, Jake's sense of perspective only grew richer. He had lived enough to see patterns in the way the world unfolded, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the endless cycle of battles, victories that faded into memory as quickly as they came. He knew that even the grandest adventures eventually gave way to quiet evenings, that every crown eventually gathered dust, and that every fire eventually cooled into embers. Where others might have seen this truth as discouraging, Jake found it strangely comforting. It was a reminder that nothing was final, that everything moved in rhythms, and that there was peace to be found in accepting those rhythms instead of fighting them. Finn often wrestled with this idea. To him, every loss felt sharp, every change a wound. When a friend moved on or when a mission ended in failure, Finn felt the ache of it in his chest. Jake, sitting beside him, would listen quietly. Then he would say something deceptively simple. "That's just how it goes, man." And Finn, after the sting of frustration passed, would begin to see the wisdom in those words. Jake wasn't dismissing pain. He was teaching Finn how to hold it without letting it break him. Their bond deepened in these later years, even as it changed shape. Finn was no longer the boy who relied on Jake for every step of the journey. He was growing into his own strength, carrying burdens Jake couldn't shield him from. Jake, in turn, stepped into the role of guide rather than protector, offering wisdom instead of answers, presence instead of control. It was a gentler kind of companionship, one that respected Finn's independence, while never letting him forget that Jake's love remained constant. At the same time, Jake's own life began to feel heavier with reflections of mortality. He never panicked about it, never let it consume him. But the thought was there, soft, steady, undeniable. He knew that he would not be there forever, and he wondered what legacy he was leaving behind. His children were living their own lives, each walking a path shaped by both his presence and his absence. Some still turned to him, others drifted away into their own worlds. Jake didn't cling to them, but he carried each of them in his heart, stretching himself not in body but in memory, in love. Rainicorn, too, remained a source of both comfort and reflection. Their love, weathered by time, had proven itself through disagreements and reconciliations, through the chaos of raising a family in a land as unpredictable as Ooh. With her, Jake found not only companionship, but also grounding. Their shared moments, watching their children, listening to the quiet of the night, talking about nothing and everything, reminded him that love itself was a form of resistance against the weight of time. Jake's music also took on new meaning during this chapter of his life. The viola he had once played as a casual hobby became a vessel for expression, carrying the lessons and emotions he didn't always put into words. When he strummed its strings, it wasn't just for entertainment. It was a way of weaving memory into sound, a way of reminding Finn, his children, and himself that even fleeting moments could be preserved in melody. His songs were never grand, never polished, but they were honest, and in their honesty, they carried more weight than any performance could. The march of time also revealed to Jake the importance of slowing down. Where once he might have chased after adventure with Finn at every call, now he found equal value in resting beneath a tree and cooking a simple meal, in listening to the world breathe around him. These quieter moments were not signs of weakness. They were reminders that life is not made only of battles. It is also made of pauses, of stillness, of the spaces between. Jake cherished these pauses, and in doing so taught Finn to cherish them too. There was no denying, however, that loss continued to shape him. Some friends vanished from their lives altogether, swallowed by change or by fate. Others grew distant, their paths diverging from Finn and Jake's. Each absence left a mark, but Jake carried them gently. He remembered them with laughter instead of sorrow, stories instead of silence. In this way he honored them, not by mourning what was gone, but by celebrating what had been. Through it all, Jake embodied resilience not as defiance, but as acceptance. He showed that strength isn't always about standing tall against time, but about bending with it, flowing with it, and still holding love at the center. The march of time did not take his laughter, nor his music, nor his loyalty. Instead, it deepened them, giving them a gravity that made his presence all the more profound. And so Jake entered this phase of life not as the carefree pup he once was, but as something more layered, more enduring. He was a father, a brother, a partner, a friend, and in each of these roles, he carried the lessons of time with grace. He showed that loss and change are not the end of joy, but part of its fabric, and he lived those lessons not through speeches or declarations, but through the simple, steady rhythm of his love. The march of time brought Jake to a place where every adventure felt like both a continuation and a farewell. He never announced it, never made it dramatic, but deep down, he knew that each passing season carried him closer to the twilight of his journey. He didn't fear it. In fact, he met it with the same calmness he had shown in every battle, every hardship, every lesson. For Jake, the end was not something to dread, but something to fold into the rhythm of life, like the closing of a song after a long night of music. What made this period of his life so profound was how Jake balanced reflection with presence. He didn't spend his days lost in worry about what was coming. Instead, he poured himself into the moments still before him. When Finn needed him, he stretched into armor, a raft, a shield. When his children visited, he listened to their stories, laughed at their quirks, and let them see that love doesn't fade with age. When Rainicorn rested beside him, he held her close, content to let silence speak for both of them. These small acts carried the weight of eternity, as if Jake knew they were the true treasures of his life. Finn, by this time, had grown into a hero in his own right, more independent than ever. Yet Jake's presence remained irreplaceable. He was no longer the brother who shielded Finn from every danger. He was the brother who reminded him of why he fought in the first place. Finn's victories were sharper, his losses heavier, but Jake's steady wisdom softened their edges. Whenever Finn stumbled under the weight of destiny, Jake reminded him with a smile that destiny was never the point. The point was living, loving, and finding joy even when the world grew harsh. There were moments, though, when Jake allowed himself to imagine what would happen after he was gone. He thought of Finn, standing alone, and hoped his brother would carry not just the lessons of heroism, but the lessons of peace. He thought of his children, each walking their own path, and hoped they would remember that their father's greatest gift wasn't his powers, but his laughter and love. He thought of Rainicorn, of the life they had shared, and hoped she would carry his memory as lightly as he had carried the mysteries of his own birth. In the quiet of these reflections, Jake found comfort in knowing that his life had been full. He had stretched across battlefields, across kingdoms, across the very boundaries of possibility. But more importantly, he had stretched across hearts, leaving pieces of himself in everyone he touched. That was the kind of immortality Jake believed in. Not cosmic power, not eternal youth, but the way love ripples outward long after you're gone. Loss continued to come, as it always does. Old friends disappeared. New threats rose and fell, and the world of ooh kept shifting. Yet Jake faced it all with acceptance. He didn't try to fight the passage of time. He didn't deny the ache of change. He simply lived with it, like a melody that gains depth as it slows. This acceptance became his final and perhaps greatest lesson. The true strength lies not in resisting the inevitable, but in embracing it with grace. To the end, Jake remained himself. He never stopped cracking jokes, never stopped playing his viola, never stopped finding the humor in even the darkest situations. He showed that laughter was not a denial of pain, but a companion to it, a way of carrying sorrow without letting it consume you. And when the day finally came for Jake to step beyond the world he had known, he did so not with fear, but with the peace of someone who had already made his life whole. Jake's story in this chapter is a reminder that time touches all things, even those born of mystery, even those with powers that seem limitless. Yet the measure of a life is not in how long it resists change, but in how beautifully it adapts. Jake stretched through every season of his life, and in doing so taught everyone around him that love, joy, and resilience are the true powers that endure. And so, in the lessons he left behind and the lives he touched, Jake continued to live on. Not as the stretchy dog who could defy the laws of nature, not as the cosmic being hinted at in dreams, but as the brother, the father, the partner, the friend. The march of time could not take that away. Instead, it carried him forward into the final chapter of his journey, where endings would fold into beginnings, and the story of Jake would find its most peaceful rest. The final chapter of Jake's life did not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It came, as so many of his lessons had, with quiet acceptance. Jake had always lived with an ease that baffled others, an ease that made him laugh at danger, sleep through crises, and shrug at mysteries that might have driven others mad. And when the time came for him to step beyond this world, he met it with the same calmness. There was no fear in him, only a readiness, as though he had been stretching toward this moment all along. By the time Jake grew old, he had already lived so many lives within one. He had been the mischievous pup who startled Germaine, the loyal brother who stood beside Finn, the partner who loved Lady Rainicorn, the father who watched his children grow, and the cosmic being who brushed shoulders with infinity. Each of these roles had carried him forward, and each had prepared him for the final journey. Unlike many who resist the idea of endings, Jake understood that endings were just another shape life takes, another form in the endless stretch of existence. When his moment of passing arrived, it was not depicted as tragedy. It was gentle, almost serene. Jake's soul, glowing with a warmth that reflected his character, drifted into the afterlife like a song finding its final note. He had always believed that life was meant to be lived without clinging, without grasping too tightly. And so he let go as easily as he had once stretched his arm into the horizon. His death was not a collapse, but a continuation, a reminder that the boundaries between here and beyond are as fluid as his own body had always been. What made Jake's passing so powerful was how it illuminated the life he had lived. For Finn, his brother's death was a loss too heavy for words. Jake had been his anchor, his guide, his constant companion. From childhood to manhood, to imagine a world without Jake was to imagine a silence where music once played. Yet even in grief, Finn found comfort in the way Jake left. His brother had not fought against time. He had not raged against the end. He had accepted it, and in that acceptance left behind a final lesson. That death, too, can be met with peace. The vision of Jake in the afterlife was both haunting and beautiful. We see him in a realm of golden fields, a world suffused with calm light, where souls wandered in the forms most true to them. Jake appeared not as something strange or cosmic, but simply as himself, tail wagging, eyes gentle, body at ease. He was content, as though the weight of all his years had melted away. It was fitting that in death, as in life, Jake chose simplicity. No cosmic crown, no grand revelation, only peace. Yet the story did not end there. For Jake's cosmic essence, hinted at throughout his life, became clearer in the afterlife. He was more than just another soul wandering the golden fields. His presence carried a weight, a recognition, as if the realm itself acknowledged him as part of something greater. Perhaps it was because of his mysterious birth. Perhaps because of the powers that had always tied him to the fabric of the universe. Whatever the reason, Jake belonged in the cosmic beyond as naturally as he had belonged in the treehouse or the arms of his family. When Finn eventually entered this realm, the reunion between the brothers was as moving as any moment in their shared journey. They embraced not with the desperation of those clinging to what is lost, but with the joy of those who know that love stretches even across death. Jake's tail wagged, Finn's eyes softened, and in that moment, the pain of separation was eased. Their bond had always been unbreakable, and the afterlife proved it true. In this golden eternity, Jake's philosophy seemed to reach its final form. He had always lived as though existence was flexible, as though joy could be found in any shape. Now, freed from the limits of time and age, he embodied that truth completely. He was at peace, not because he had solved every mystery, but because he had learned to rest within them. And in this resting, Jake showed that even in the cosmic beyond, the heart of life is not power or knowledge, but love. The beauty of Jake's final journey is how natural it felt. Almost as though the universe had been preparing him for it all along. His life had always been about stretching his body across impossible spaces, stretching his heart across those he loved, stretching his soul across mysteries he never tried to force into answers. And so, when he crossed into the golden fields of the afterlife, it felt like the most natural stretch of all. In that place, Jake did not carry the weight of questions. He did not need to ask what he was or why he had been given powers that bent the rules of reality. Those questions had never defined him in life, and they did not haunt him in death. Instead, what mattered was presence. the feel of the warm light across his fur, the sound of laughter in the distance, the reunion with souls long past. Everything about the realm reflected Jake's own philosophy, that existence is not about clinging to meaning, but about living fully in each moment as it arrives. Finn's reunion with Jake revealed just how much their bond transcended mortality. When Finn first laid eyes on his brother in that radiant landscape, it was like seeing the sun rise after a long and weary night. Jake's smile was the same, his voice the same, his playful warmth undiminished. Their embrace was not a desperate grasp, but a homecoming, the kind that assures you that no matter how far you've wandered, love will always lead you back. Finn had faced countless challenges, but none as heavy as losing Jake. To find him again was proof that their bond was stronger than even the finality of death. What followed was not a grand adventure, but something more intimate. Finn and Jake walked together through fields of golden grass, talking, laughing, remembering. There was no rush, no enemy to fight, no quest to complete. It was simply the two of them, as it had always been, side by side. And in that simplicity lay the true power of their story. Adventure had defined their lives, but companionship had given it meaning. Even in the serene beyond, hints of Jake's cosmic nature lingered. His form seemed to ripple with the same playful elasticity he had in life. But there was something more now, an aura that suggested he was not just a soul among others, but a thread woven deeply into the fabric of the afterlife itself. The golden fields welcomed him as though he belonged there, not as a guest, but as a part of their design. Jake had always been more than just a dog. He was a reminder of the universe's flexibility, its ability to bend without breaking, to carry both sorrow and joy without losing its shape. What made Jake's final chapter so moving was how it reframed death itself. For many, death is feared as an end, a rupture. But Jake showed it as another transformation, another stretch. He did not fight it, nor did he sink into despair. He accepted it with the same ease he had accepted everything else, turning it into another adventure, not one of battles, but of peace. His death was not a tragedy, but a lesson, that endings can be soft, that love can carry you across even the widest divide, and that peace is as much a part of the journey as laughter or pain. For Finn, walking beside Jake in this afterlife was both healing and humbling. He had spent his life chasing answers, striving to be a hero, wrestling with the weight of destiny. Yet here in the golden fields, Jake reminded him of what truly mattered. Not crowns, not victories, not even the endless battles fought for good. What mattered was love, companionship, and the quiet moments that fill a life with meaning. Finn saw that Jake's greatest power had never been his stretching. It had been his ability to live without fear, to find joy in the smallest things, and to give that joy freely to others. And so, Jake's final journey was not about transcendence into some higher power, nor about claiming a cosmic throne. It was about embodying, even in death, the truth he had always lived by, that life is flexible, that love stretches further than time, and that peace is found not in knowing everything, but in resting in what is. In the golden expanse of the afterlife, Jake's story settled into a rhythm that felt both eternal and familiar. The fields shimmered with a soft light, and the air hummed with quiet melodies, as though the universe itself were sighing in contentment. Jake wandered through it all with the same easy gait he had in life, tail swaying lazily, eyes half lidded with peace. For him, the afterlife was not strange or intimidating. It was simply another shape to stretch into, another chapter of the journey he had always embraced with such grace. Finn, walking at his side, marveled at how naturally Jake belonged there. The boy who had once leaned on his brother for every ounce of courage now stood as a man, yet still found comfort in Jake's presence. In that radiant realm, Finn realized that Jake's true gift had never been the battles he won or the powers he wielded. It was the way he had made the world feel safe, even in its darkest hours. Jake had always been a kind of home, and in the golden fields, Finn felt that truth more clearly than ever. The afterlife also revealed a subtle truth about Jake's cosmic nature. He did not dissolve into the background as just another soul. Instead, the very landscape seemed to bend with him, as if the fields were an extension of his stretch. The trees swayed with his rhythm. The light shifted to match his laughter. Jake had always lived as though the universe was flexible, and now the universe itself seemed to reflect that truth back to him. He wasn't separate from this cosmic beyond. He was part of it, inseparable from its design. And yet, Jake did not claim greatness. He never looked at Finn and said, "See, I told you I was more than just a dog." Instead, he treated eternity the same way he treated a sunny afternoon, and with playfulness, with music, with the steady calm of someone who knew that joy is not something to be chased, but something to be carried. Finn, in his grief, found healing in this. Jake was not gone. He had simply stretched into a new form of presence. Their reunion in this realm was not just about comfort. It was about reminding Finn of the lessons Jake had always carried. In quiet conversations beneath the golden sky, Jake spoke of impermanence, of the importance of laughter, of the need to love deeply without fear of loss. These were the same truths he had whispered in life, but now they glowed with the clarity of eternity. Finn realized that Jake had always been preparing him for this moment, not by teaching him to fight harder, but by teaching him to live softer. Jake's presence in the afterlife also offered a mirror to his own family. His children, still living their lives in carried his essence in ways they might not even recognize. Charlie's mystical nature, Viola's artistry, Kim Kil-Wan's groundedness, TV's ease, and Jake Jr.'s fire. They were all stretches of Jake's heart, each one reflecting a different piece of the man who had raised them. And though Jake now walked in golden fields, the love he had given them ensured he still lived within their choices, their dreams, their laughter. Rainicorn, too, carried him with her. The bond they had built did not end with his passing. For Jake, love was never about permanence of body, but the permanence of presence. And so, even in the afterlife, his heart stretched back toward the life they had shared, a quiet tether of memory and devotion that no distance could sever. The most profound truth of Jake's final journey was how it reframed the idea of endings. In endings were often feared. Wars ended with destruction. Relationships ended with heartbreak. Lives ended with grief. But Jake showed that an ending could also be gentle, that it could flow like a river into the sea, carrying everything it touched into something larger. His death was not a fracture, but a continuation, proof that the love you give stretches further than your body, further than your years, further than even your world. And so Jake's final legacy was not just the adventures he had, nor the cosmic power he carried unknowingly. It was the way he revealed that life and death are not opposites, but companions, that to live with joy is to already prepare for peace, that to stretch your heart across those you love is to remain with them forever, even when your body is gone. In the golden fields of the beyond, Jake did not become a ruler or a god. He became what he had always been, a brother, a father, a partner, a friend. And in that simple truth, he shone brighter than any cosmic throne ever could. The longer Finn walked with Jake through the golden fields, the more he understood that this was not a dream nor an illusion, but a continuation. The afterlife was not about forgetting the life they had lived, but about honoring it, carrying it forward into something softer, wider, more eternal. For Finn, the pain of losing Jake still lingered, but every step beside his brother reminded him that love doesn't disappear with time. It stretches, just as Jake always had, into places unseen. Jake himself seemed perfectly at home. He lay back in the grass, arms folded behind his head, smiling up at skies painted in endless hues of gold and lavender. The cosmic beyond was infinite, but Jake treated it with the same ease as his treehouse hammock. He hummed little tunes, told Finn jokes, and watched the horizon with calm eyes. If anyone had been born to show how to embrace the eternal, it was Jake. His secret had always been that he never complicated things. He simply lived, and in doing so, he revealed truths that no prophecy or spell could capture. In this final chapter, Jake's cosmic nature fully revealed itself, not as something grand or terrifying, but as something beautifully ordinary. He was not a god, not a ruler of worlds, not a being meant to bend others to his will. He was simply part of the universe, woven into its fabric like starlight or song. His powers had always hinted at this, but now, free from the limits of his mortal body, it was clear. Jake was not separate from the cosmos. He was the cosmos, expressed in the form of a loving, stretchy dog who had chosen to live his life with laughter and warmth. Finn felt this truth, even if he couldn't put it into words. Sitting beside his brother in that radiant place, he realized that Jake's greatest adventure had not been the dungeons they cleared or the monsters they fought. It had been this: the way he stretched himself across every life he touched, leaving each one softer, stronger, brighter. Jake had always been a companion, but in truth, he had been a teacher too. A teacher of resilience, of acceptance, of joy. Eventually, Finn knew he would have to return to Uo. His path was not finished, and Jake's lessons were not meant to stay hidden in the beyond. They were meant to live on in every step Finn took, in every song he sang, in every act of kindness he carried forward. The thought of leaving his brother again filled him with sorrow, but Jake, ever steady, smiled and placed a hand on Finn's shoulder. He didn't need to speak much, just a few simple words, the kind Jake always favored, enough to remind Finn that everything would be all right. The goodbye was not an ending. It was another stretch, another transformation, another proof that love reaches further than time. Finn carried Jake's spirit back with him, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a constant presence. And in Oo, whenever the wind bent through the trees, whenever music floated on the evening air, whenever laughter rose in the face of hardship, Jake was there, always. Jake's final journey, then, was not about leaving, but about showing what remains. That endings can be gentle, that the cosmos itself is flexible, that every life, no matter how strange or mysterious its origins, can leave behind a legacy of love. He was born of a magical accident, raised in a broken world, gifted with powers that bent the rules of existence. But in the end, what defined him was not mystery or magic. It was family. It was laughter. It was the way he stretched his heart across everyone he held dear. And so Jake's story closes not with fanfare, but with peace. A peace that invites us to rest as he rests, to laugh as he laughed, to love as he loved. His journey from pup to hero to father to cosmic being shows us that life is many shapes, many stretches, many songs, and that all of them are worth embracing. Jake didn't need to solve the universe to belong to it. He simply lived, and in that living, he became eternal. And now, as we close this story together, let Jake's final lesson be your lullaby tonight. That even as time moves, even as endings arrive, love carries on. It stretches into memory, into dreams, into the quiet spaces of our hearts. Jake showed us that life's greatest adventure is not about fighting forever, but about resting gently when the time comes, knowing that joy and love endure. Good night, but